So I think a couple of you have been to a Dream Lab before, and a couple of you haven't. So do just a little explanation, kind of what it looks like, so you have a feel for it. But our goal with the Dream Lab is to do two things. One, we want to provide something that is a video that's going to be able to train up and mentor dream interpreters so that they become better. But we also want to have a place where you get to interact with one another and you get mentored in interpreting dreams as well, and have some input. And so what we'll do is we'll have just different ones will come up and share a dream. And after they share the dream, and we'll just stand up here. So I'll have whoever it is just come and stand next to me. Don't have to worry about a mic. We've got it right there. Make it nice and easy. So you'll share the dream. After you've shared the dream, we'll repeat back the dream, make sure that we've got it correctly. And then we will have you guys break up into groups of 3 or 4 people and just work through the dream, work through an interpretation of the dream. Come up with a title, focus, sub-focus, what your interpretation is. I'll give you about 10 to 15 minutes depending on the dream, sometimes 20 if it's a nice long one. And then we'll put it up on the board and we'll walk through it all together, and I'll have a couple of you come up and share what you got for the interpretation. So as you're going through getting the interpretation of the dream, think about how you would communicate it to the dreamer. Because in the sharing of the interpretation, we want to help people not just in being able to figure out what the dream means, but how do you communicate it to the dreamer so that they can understand what's intended. There's 2 parts of that skill of interpreting. And then we'll, after a couple have shared, then we'll kind of go through any pieces that were in the diagram that might explain just a little bit extra, and go through what was the main pieces that we had to get and what were the extra pieces that are just helpful and nice for the dreamer. And we'll go to the next dream. Make sense? Yep. Yay. So who has a dream that Carmen? Carmen.
Where do you want me to stand? Right here?
Yeah.
Okay. I was at a meeting with 2 of my brothers who are named Sean and Derek. Seats that were closer up became available, so I suggested we move up. Sean Bowles was the speaker, but before he came out, Derek started to prophesy to me about our family and about something wonderful for my life. Then my brother Sean, who hadn't been in the sanctuary when Derek prophesied, came in and started to prophesy the same thing Derek prophesied over me and our family. He stood the whole time and he continued to prophesy. In fact, the service was going to start, but Sean kept prophesying. I wanted him to come sit down, but he kept prophesying. I also noticed that the people who had originally left their seats were a little aggravated that we had taken them. The seats were completely empty, and they assumed that when they came back, they'd be there. Not. That's it.
Okay. So in this dream, you're going to a meeting.
We're already there.
And you're with your 2 brothers, Derek and Sean.
That's it.
And so you find yourself seats, and as you're sitting there, you notice that these seats a little further forward come loose because people leave. And so you say, hey, why don't we move up? So you move up, and once you move up, your brother Derek begins to prophesy over you. He begins to give you a prophetic word over your family and over you personally.
That's right.
And it was a really good prophetic word. And then your brother Sean, that had been out of the meeting, he comes in and finds you. And when he gets there, he had not heard anything that Derek said. He also begins to prophesy over you, sharing similar things. And he just keeps on prophesying. And he keeps on prophesying. Now, Sean Boltz is supposed to be speaking, and you know the meeting's just about ready to get started, and you're thinking, hurry up, because this meeting is getting started. We're here for this. We can do this some other time.
Right.
And at the same time, you recognize the people that had left the seats were coming back, and they had just assumed that they left the seats, that they were going to be there. But there was nothing marking them saying that they were going to be there. And you're like, well, we have every right to be here because they weren't saved.
Right.
And that was how the dream ended.
That's it.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you very
thanks.
much. All right. So you're going to want to pause your video And take a moment, figure out what's the title of this dream, figure out your focuses, your sub-focuses, and a couple details, and work through what you would think that the interpretation is. And once you get ready and you have an interpretation, come back and let's see what we get here at the lab. Welcome back to the lab. We're just about ready to work through this dream. So let's start out. What did you guys get for a title for this one?
Confusion.
Confusion.
Prophesying brothers.
Prophesying brothers. Anybody else?
Don't leave your seat.
Move your feet, lose your seat. That's a fun one. Prophesying brothers. Okay, that's our title. Who or what was the focus of this one? The dreamer, yes. Carmen, it's all about you.
Not quite, but.
Was it your dream?
This dream, at least. And our sub-focuses.
The brothers.
The brothers, yes. Anything else?
Prophecies.
Anybody else have to think every time they write prophecy or prophesize it, S or a C? S or C? What else?
The closer seats.
Closer seats. So how about if we put the meeting as a sub-focus and then the seats as a detail? This is either a sub-focus. Actually, that's got to be a sub-focus because without that, you really lose your plot. But it's tied into the brothers. So we will put an arrow. And they're prophesying to the dreamer. So let's put an arrow there just to remember who's being prophesied to. Anything else important?
Sean Bolt.
Yeah, the speaker.
I'm going to cheat and just put the last name. Anything else? So one of the things, and we'll leave it with the seats, but one of the things at the end is we have two different pieces that are creating tension. So you have this, and I'm going to just put end. When are they going to stop? The meeting's about ready to start. That feeling of tension is really important to the flow of that dream. Without that feeling of tension, it really changes the plot. So that's got a piece. And then the other piece is that feeling of tension of we want our seats back.
Right.
So I'm not even sure exactly how to write that, but I'm just going to write people. And that's kind of a sub-focus, but that feeling of tension is even more important than what that. We don't have to know who the people is, but that feeling is going to have some meaning in the interpretation. All right. Anything that we missed? So who wants to give a try for the interpretation? What did you guys come up with? Come on, I got to get at least a couple tries. You got something?
Yeah, we'll say what we have.
So I'm going to have you come right on up here. Just stand next to me.
Okay. So my first question would have been in asking Carmen, is that right? So when you were, when your brother was prophesying over you, what were you, like you commented that you wanted him to move on, kind of, okay, the speaker's supposed to come, let's. So how are you feeling?
It was glorious and beautiful because if you knew how I loved, these are my brothers in real life. They feel like my kids. They're not. I'm this oldest sister. So on the one hand, it's so glorious that they would be prophesying. So I was enraptured that they would be prophesying. Then on the other hand, only one went long. The first one was fine.
Mm-hmm.
My middle brother just kept going and going and going. It was annoying, but I was like, but I like things decently and in order. So I'm like, okay, this is good, but the other Sean is about to come out here, so you need to, wrap it up. Come on.
Okay.
And so on the one hand, it was glorious, but on the other hand, Big Sis was like, okay, what order? Like, come on, now the speaker's going to come, so now I think you should stop.
Mm-hmm.
And this, spirit of the prophet is subject to the prophet, so I'm like, you can stop, like, turn that thing off.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because the other Sean's about to come out, so.
Okay, so the first thing we did in our group was we looked up Sean's name. Okay, and so his name is God is gracious and servant. And his scripture reference is 1 Peter 4:10. Like good stewards of the manifold grace of God, serve one another with whatever gift each of you has received. And so he was prophesying as well, right? And so I guess what we were sort of drawn to was the fact that, number one, the people that kind of got a little offended that the seats were being taken, they had already moved, and you all came in, the seats were open, so you moved forward, you took the seats, and prophecy began to flow.
Mm-hmm.
And then the seats were, the people came in and got sort of offended,
Yeah.
right? That the
Right.
seats were taken.
Right.
And so we kind of felt like they represented, like that the Holy Spirit, that the gifts are for all of us to begin to move in. It's for us to edify the body. And although I love Sean Bowles, his heart is that the body does this and moves in that. And so kind of felt like God is moving you and your family and you representing also the body of Christ into more of that movement of our giftings and not waiting on the man to come and be the speaker, be the one that does it. That it's okay and that we need to be moving in those gifts also. And it was as he, as you moved forward and stepped into that place, prophecy began to flow. Mm-hmm. And so those people, I felt like those people, and I think we agreed in our group that as the people moved out of their seats, the Lord, that was perhaps the old and the new coming in, and that he's making way for us to all move in that and to flow in that, and that it's, moving out of those compartments that we put ourselves in, and, not to show any disrespect. I hope I'm making that clear.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
of course not.
But the heart is for us all to move in that, and that's okay as your brother, was moving in that, just to let that flow freely. Did I say all that right? Did you get? Did I get it? And I think Derek. We also looked up Derek. Let's see what that. Okay, so Derek is ruler and gifted. Ecclesiastes 2:26. For God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. Again, gifted. Anyway, I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you. Great. Very good. All right. So now, just a couple things in our diagram. And these were included in the interpretation, but just sharing them. The meeting and the fact that Sean Boltz was going to be speaking is talking about that this is prophetic ministry. So Sean Boltz isn't representing Sean, he's representing prophetic ministry and a very public prophetic ministry because of the position that the Lord's given him. Right? And then brothers is more about family. And so that could be literal family, but also could be metaphoric family, those that she's in relationship, that she's with. And then the seats is a place that somebody else abandoned right? But when she stepped into it, there was jealousy and competition. And so that this idea of pressing in, that God's going to begin to do in the family the things that they've seen publicly, that God's going to begin to use those that you love and those that you know to begin to minister and begin to release that revelation because you've stepped into something that other people have left abandoned. And when that begins to happen, there may be jealousy and there may be competition, but don't worry about that. You did it in the innocence of your own heart. You stepped into something that was left there. And then realizing that the ministry that we've looked to as a body, and I love how she pointed that out, that so often we look to the speaker, we look to the one that's in front, but it's God's going to begin to use those that are closer, those that are in your family, to begin to give you those impactful and powerful prophetic words that used to come from more of a public figure. Any questions on this dream? All right.
So,
Yeah, please,
so
Ashish.
when we say, when someone sees that they're in a meeting, does it really mean ministry, or is it very specific to this, dream that it looks like a ministry, like a prophetic ministry that you said?
It depends on the meeting itself.
Okay.
Yeah, so in the dream, the context will tell you a lot. A business meeting, depending on what's happening in the business meeting, where you have a business meeting where a leader is going to come and tell everybody what's happening, give an update, that would have a particular meaning in a dream. But if it's a meeting where, let's say the leaders of different areas are all getting together to strategize for the future, that meeting in a dream would have a very different meaning. And so this being a ministry meeting, it's the conference setting, it just carries that whole picture of Christian ministry, Christian conference, the things that happen publicly. And so it's just kind of the overall feel. Yeah. That make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Good. Any other questions?
Any significance to the point that she felt like, that this should kind of end, and so that Sean Bowles can start ministering?
Yeah, so what was that tension she was feeling about it ending and Sean Bolt's? And she explained that afterwards. It was just her desire. Everything needs to be in order, that she sees the way that things have worked, and she's trying to honor and trying to respect those that are in a place of leadership. And so that it's God saying that he's going to be using people that are close to her, but her heart is pure, that she still honors those that are in a public place of ministry in the midst of that. It's not going to take away from her receiving in that way, even though he's going to be moving in this other way as well. I was talking to a friend of mine earlier today, and he was talking about just releasing some things and beginning to teach some things, and he was concerned that that people would take it a little bit too far or take it in the wrong direction. They start to operate out of the flesh. And I took him back to the parable in Matthew chapter 13. There's this parable of the tares and the wheat, where the wheat was sown into a field, and then the enemy comes and he sows the tares. And whenever the wheat is sown, whenever God begins to move, the enemy will always come and sow in tares. Our job is not to try to separate out the tares from the wheat. That's the harvester's job. When the workers of the field came to the master and said, "Lord, should we get rid of the tares?" He's like, "No, leave them alone, because you might tear out wheat." Why? Because when a tare and a wheat are immature, they both look the same. You can't tell the difference. But when a tare and a wheat mature, the difference becomes very obvious, because the wheat begins to bear fruit, and as the weight of the grain comes on the wheat, it begins to bow, but the tare remains standing straight. At maturity, you can tell the difference, but you have to leave that grow up together and then let God deal with separating out. It will become obvious to all at maturity. But if we spend too much time trying to protect it, there have been revivals that have been killed because people tried to protect and take out the tares while the wheat was being sown. And so that's just a great thing for all of us to learn, because the more God moves, the more tares get sown. And it's not our place It's our place to disciple people, to love people, and to protect our own heart. Right? We keep our hearts right, but it's God's place to remove the tares when they begin to grow. So that's an important principle.